History has no shortage of disasters and mistakes. While some fade over time and are almost forgotten, others leave a permanent mark and change the world forever. In this video, we'll be covering 4 of the biggest mistakes in history.
Time 21:03:15 Greenwich Mean Time.
BP's Deepwater Horizon oil spill is one of the worst environmental disasters in history. It began on April 20th, 2010, in the Gulf of Mexico on the BP-operated Macondo prospect. On the night of April 20th, a surge of natural gas blasted through a concrete core. The core was likely too weak to withstand the pressure because it was composed of a concrete mixture that used nitrogen gas to accelerate curing. Once released by the fracture of the core, the natural gas traveled up the Deepwater rig's riser to the platform, where it ignited, killing 11 workers and injuring 17. The rig capsized and sank on the morning of April 22nd, rupturing the riser, through which drilling mud had been injected in order to counteract the upward pressure of oil and natural gas. Without any opposing force, oil began to discharge into the Gulf. Although BP attempted to activate the rig's blowout preventer, which is a fail-safe mechanism designed to close the channel through which oil was drawn, the device malfunctioned. The explosion on the offshore drilling platform caused an estimated 4.9 million barrels, or around 134 million gallons of oil to be released into the Gulf of Mexico for 87 days. The immediate effects were devastating, with marine life dying, beaches being polluted, and the livelihoods of many people being impacted. Scientists are still uncovering the long-term effects that this man-made disaster has had on the environment to this day.
The ill-fated Hindenburg on her last flight sails over New York. These pictures, made from a Pathé News plane less than 4 hours before the tragedy, show the world's largest airship heading for Lakehurst, New Jersey.
The Hindenburg stands as one of the most catastrophic aerial disasters in history, tragically ending with 36 fatalities, nearly a third of those aboard. In 1937, this German airship famously burst into flames and plummeted to the ground upon attempting to land in New Jersey. On May 6, 1937, around 7:25 p.m., the first visible external flames appeared. Reports vary, but most witnesses saw the flames at the top of the hull, just forward of the vertical fin, near the ventilation shaft between cells 4 and 5. The fire quickly spread and soon engulfed the tail of the ship, but the ship remained level for a few more seconds before the tail began to sink and the nose pointed upward to the sky, with a blowtorch of flame erupting from the bow, where 12 crew members were stationed, including the 6 who were sent forward to keep ship in trim. The rapidly increasing angle of the ship caused passengers and crew to tumble against the walls, the furniture, and each other. The fire spread quickly, consuming the ship in less than a minute. Passengers and crew members began jumping out the promenade windows to escape the burning ship, and most of the passengers and all of the crew who were in the public rooms on the A-deck at the time of the fire survived. Those who were deeper inside the ship, in the passenger cabins at the center of the decks or the crew spaces along the keel, generally died in the fire. Given the speed with which Hindenburg burned, survival for the crew was largely a matter of luck. Those who were close to a means of exit at the time of the fire generally survived, including 9 of the 11 men in the engine cars and 10 of the 12 men in the control car. The men stationed in the bow, who were exposed to the column of flame that rose through the ship as the bow pointed skyward, had the least chance. The 9 men who were closest to the front of the ship at the time of the fire all died. 13 of the 36 passengers and 22 of the 61 crew died as a result of the crash, along with 1 member of the civilian landing party. It seems clear that the Hindenburg disaster was caused by an electrostatic discharge that ignited leaking hydrogen. The spark was most likely caused by a difference in electric potential between the airship and the surrounding air. The airship was approximately 200 feet above the airfield in an electrically charged atmosphere, but the ship's metal framework was grounded by its landing line. The difference in electric potential likely caused a spark to jump from the ship's fabric covering, which had the ability to hold a charge, to the ship's framework, which was grounded through the landing line. The cause of the hydrogen leak is more of a mystery, but we know the ship experienced a significant leakage of hydrogen before the disaster. Some suggest there was sabotage involved, but no evidence of sabotage was ever found, and no convincing theory of sabotage has ever been advanced.
We have main engine start, 4, 3, and liftoff. Liftoff of the 25th Space Shuttle mission, and it has cleared the tower.
The Challenger disaster will forever be remembered as a heartbreaking moment in modern history. On the fateful day of January 28, 1986, the spacecraft exploded 46,000 feet above the Atlantic Ocean, only 73 seconds after launch, killing all 7 astronauts aboard. The cause of the disaster was the failure of the primary and secondary redundant O-ring seals in a joint in the shuttle's right solid rocket booster, or SRB for short. The record low temperatures on the morning of the launch had stiffened the rubber O-rings, reducing their ability to seal the joints. Shortly after liftoff, the seals were breached and hot pressurized gas from within the SRB leaked through the joint and burned through the aft attachment strut, connecting it to the external propellant tank, then into the tank itself. The collapse of the external propellant tank's internal structures and the rotation of the SRB that followed through the shuttle stack, traveling at a speed of Mach 1.92 into a direction that allowed aerodynamic forces to tear the orbiter apart. Both SRBs detached from the now destroyed ET and continued to fly uncontrollably until the range safety officer destroyed them. The crew compartment, human remains, and many other fragments from the shuttle were recovered from the ocean floor after a 3-month search and recovery operation. The exact timing of the deaths of the crew is unknown, but several crew members are thought to have survived the initial breakup of the spacecraft. The orbiter had no escape system, and the impact of the crew compartment at terminal velocity with the ocean surface was too violent to be survivable.
It's now clear that the Soviet Union has suffered one of the worst disasters in the history of nuclear power. Massive quantities of radiation have apparently been released in an accident at the Chernobyl power station in the Ukraine.
The nuclear disaster of Chernobyl has gone down in history as one of the biggest tragedies caused by human error. The Chernobyl disaster began on April 26, 1986, with the explosion of the number 4 reactor of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant near the city of Pripyat. The disaster occurred while running a test to simulate cooling the reactor during an accident in blackout conditions.
But let's look at what exactly happened at Chernobyl on April 26, 1986. The lead-up to the explosion actually started 24 hours earlier. The sequence of events started when the Russians began to shut down their reactor in preparation for an experiment, a test which was ironically aimed at improving the overall safety of the reactor. The idea was to disconnect one of the turbines from the reactor and find out if it was possible to use the energy from it as it slowed down to power some pumps which were part of the reactor's emergency cooling system.
The operators carried out the test despite an accidental drop in reactor power due to a design issue. Attempting to shut down the reactor in those conditions resulted in a dramatic power surge. The reactor components ruptured, lost coolants, and the resulting steam explosions and meltdown destroyed the containment building, followed by a reactor core fire that spread radioactive contaminants across the USSR and Europe. A 6.2-mile exclusion zone was established 36 hours after the accident, initially evacuating around 49,000 people, but the evacuation zone was later expanded to 19 miles, resulting in 68,000 more being evacuated. Following the explosion, which killed 2 engineers and severely burned 2 others, an emergency operation began to put out the fires and stabilize the reactor. Of the 237 workers hospitalized, 134 showed symptoms of acute radiation syndrome. 28 of those died within 3 months, and over the next decade, 14 more workers, 9 of which had acute radiation syndrome, died of various causes. The toxic fallout resulted in thousands of people becoming victims of radiation poisoning, and it is one of only 2 nuclear energy accidents rated at the maximum severity on the International Nuclear Event Scale, the other being the Fukushima nuclear accident. It took nearly 10 years to clean up the disaster and its deadly after effects, and it remains the worst and costliest nuclear disaster in history, with an estimated cost of $700 billion.